How could a person survive the harsh winters of the Great Plains or the northeastern forests without a blanket or a source of heat? Most of us probably imagine a scene like this. Nighttime, Native Americans huddled around a bright campfire, wrapped in fur skins. But what if I told you that the most effective methods of heat conservation had nothing to do with fire and were known to the indigenous peoples of North America long before the arrival of Europeans? The secret lay in a deep understanding of the physics of heat, engineering, and materials obtained from the wild. Watch the video to the end to learn how Native Americans turned their homes into perfect, smokeless thermoses and how they learned to conserve heat using their own bodies. What if I told you that everything you believed was wrong? Let's start with the dwelling, the symbol of the nomadic tribes of the Great Plains, the Tipi. Contrary to popular belief, the Tipi was not just a cone made of animal skins. It was an ingeniously designed mobile engineering structure that kept you warm in winter and cool in summer. The main secret was the creation of a double layer, or inner canopy, called a liner or odashi. This canopy was a separate inner screen, woven or sewn from animal skins, which was attached to the ground and rose to about human height. Thus, an airspace was formed between the outer covering of the teepee and the inner canopy, which served as an ideal heat insulator. The canopy created a thermos effect, as the air heated by human breath and body heat was trapped in this space. Cold air that penetrated from below under the outer covering rose, entered the air cushion, and heated up before reaching the living space. In addition, the liner blocked the direct penetration of cold wind, preventing it from blowing out the heat from inside. Another important detail was the smoke chamber located at the very top of the teepee. The smoke flaps, or ears of the teepee, could be adjusted with long poles, directing the smoke outlet depending on the direction of the wind. This allowed, with minimal use of fire, if it was lit at all for cooking, to create a natural draft that removed smoke but did not let precious heat escape outside. During the cold season, the lower edge of the teepee's outer covering, often held down with stones or logs, was not completely sealed. A small gap remained, through which fresh but already warmed air slowly entered. This provided minimal but constant air circulation, preventing suffocation and moisture accumulation. The outer covering itself was traditionally made from carefully treated bison hides, which had excellent water repellent and insulating properties. Treating the hides was a long and laborious process, but the result was a covering that did not get wet and provided reliable protection from wind, snow, and rain. Later, after the arrival of Europeans, the hides were replaced with thick cotton or canvas, but the principle of double covering remained the same. Surprisingly, even in the most severe frosts, a properly constructed teepee could maintain a comfortable temperature using only the heat from a small fire, and sometimes without it at all. The interior volume of the teepee was relatively small, which allowed body heat to quickly warm the enclosed space, especially if several people were sleeping in it. The inhabitants of the eastern forests, such as the Iroquois, used a different but equally effective design: the longhouse. In a longhouse, heat was retained by thick walls made of bark and a wooden frame, and the overall temperature was maintained by several hearths located along the central passageway. The hearths were shared by several families, and the heat from them spread throughout the structure. Thus, the dwellings of indigenous peoples were not just shelters, but active elements of a thermoregulation system. They were designed to use the natural laws of physics to retain the heat generated by humans themselves and their small fires. These principles are still studied in modern architecture as examples of sustainable and energy-efficient construction. Do you think that the teepee design can be considered more eco-friendly and smart in terms of heat conservation than modern tents and shelters? Share your opinion in the comments and don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Ready to learn the main secret of how Native Americans stayed warm? In addition to mobile tipis, many Native American cultures, especially those where winters were really long and harsh, used semi-underground and earthen houses. These dwellings became the pinnacle of construction wisdom because they turned the main disadvantage of winter, namely frozen ground, into its main advantage. The earth served as a natural protection, creating the effect of a huge natural blanket. Earth houses, including the winter lodges of the Mandan and Hidatsa peoples who lived along the Missouri River, took advantage of the enormous thermal inertia of the soil, which allowed them to retain heat even during the coldest months. The essence of this method was to use the earth as a powerful thermal buffer. At a depth of just a few feet, the soil temperature remains virtually unchanged throughout the year. In summer, the soil accumulates heat, and in winter, it slowly releases it. This means that even during severe frosts, the temperature under the layer of earth remains stable, much higher than the surface temperature. By building their dwellings partially underground, the Indians placed themselves in a space where nature itself took care of preserving heat. This made life in such houses much safer and more comfortable compared to any above-ground structures. Structurally, earthen houses were deep pits of a round or oval shape. Their walls were reinforced with logs to prevent the soil from crumbling. A sturdy frame of thick logs was built over the pit, which was covered horizontally with powerful beams. This frame was covered with a thick layer of branches, reeds, and straw, and then covered with a large amount of earth. The layer of earth sometimes reached several feet, which turned the roof into real thermal armor. The entrance to such dwellings was often a low, long tunnel that required the entrant to bend down and move slowly. The low entrance tunnel was essential for heat conservation. It functioned as a kind of airlock. Cold air could not enter directly. Its movement was slowed down, and it gradually warmed up as it passed through the narrow space. This approach reduced sharp temperature differences between the outside environment and the interior. This engineering solution made the dwelling more resistant to sudden gusts of wind, which was extremely important in places where winter was accompanied by severe storms. The thick earthen roof and dense walls provided ideal thermal insulation. The cold could not quickly penetrate the layer of soil, which took a long time to freeze. Inside the house, heat was retained thanks to human warmth, small hearths or coal pits, which were used for cooking and heating. Even without large fires, the temperature in such houses remained well above freezing. This made it possible not only to sleep, but also to go about daily life without the risk of freezing. For additional insulation, reed mats were sometimes attached to the walls, or animal skins were hung up. These materials created an additional inner layer that helped to retain heat even better. A small air gap formed between the mats and the earthen wall, which improved thermal insulation. This principle of layering is found in many traditional cultures and shows how deeply people understood natural processes without modern technology. Earth houses were incredibly wind-resistant. Their semi-underground structure protected them from even the strongest winter storms. On the Great Plains, the wind was constant and sometimes very powerful, so the ability to take shelter in a house that did not sway, creak, or let in drafts was invaluable. This allowed people to conserve their strength and avoid the constant exposure to the cold that would have exhausted them in the open air. Building such houses required enormous collective effort. It took weeks and sometimes months. Every family and community participated in the process, which strengthened ties within the tribe. However, the result was worth the effort. An earthen house could last for decades and was suitable for large family groups to live in. It became a real center of life, protected from wind, cold, and predators, blending harmoniously into the surrounding landscape. This construction method clearly shows that Native Americans had a deep understanding of passive heating systems and natural geothermal stability. They used what nature gave them and did so wisely, without disturbing the balance between humans and the environment. Their dwellings were practical, reliable, and surprisingly effective, despite the simplicity of the materials. An earthen house was much more than just a place to sleep. It became a fortress against the winter cold, a space where the family could stay warm and safe. Inside these houses, people did their household chores, prepared food, crafted everyday items, and spent time together, sheltering from the harsh weather. It was a form of housing that allowed people to survive where the open countryside became hostile. How useful do you think this earth-based technology could be in modern construction? Watch the video to the end to find out how a sweet treat turned into a field kitchen. You've definitely never heard of this unique secret. While tipis and earthen houses provided general insulation, special methods were used for sleeping that prevented people from freezing directly on the ground. The most important element of the sleeping area was the fur bedding, which was not just a blanket, but a sophisticated multi-layered system that protected against heat loss from below. This system was absolutely necessary as the greatest heat loss occurs when in contact with the cold surface of the ground. The first lowest layer was often a thick layer of spruce or pine branches, as well as dry grass or reeds. These materials, thanks to their loose structure, created an air cushion and interrupted direct contact with the cold ground or floor of the dwelling. In addition, spruce branches have a pleasant smell and repel some insects. Mats woven from reeds or other plant fibers were laid on top of the flooring. These mats served as an additional insulating layer and protected expensive fur skins from moisture and dirt. They were also easy to wash and replace, which contributed to hygiene. The most important and valuable element was the skins. Most often, thick bison, moose, or deer skins were used, treated in a special way to preserve the softness and maximum thickness of the wool. The skins were laid with the wool facing down, toward the ground, or with the wool facing up, serving as a mattress, depending on individual preferences and the thickness of the fur. Bison had incredibly thick undercoats and thick skin, which made their hides ideal insulators. On such a bed, a person could sleep using only their clothes and a thin blanket. The animal's hide thus served a dual function. It prevented body heat from escaping into the ground and reflected it back. Sometimes bags sewn from several skins were used for sleeping. A person would climb inside such a bag, and the heat of their body would instantly begin to warm the enclosed space. It was similar to a sleeping bag, but made entirely of natural and very thick fur. The sleeping platform system was an example of how indigenous peoples skillfully used natural materials. They did not waste energy on constantly warming the cold floor, but immediately created a warm, insulated platform for sleeping. This allowed the body to completely relax and recover. Fur flooring was a symbol of wealth and prosperity. Well-made, soft skins were highly valued and served as a commodity. A family that had enough bison skins for a comfortable night's sleep was considered wealthy. It was not just a place to sleep, it was an individual heat retention system that worked without external energy sources. This proves that Native Americans understood the principles of effective thermal insulation long before the advent of modern technology. Like this video if you think these survival techniques are admirable. What you are about to learn will change your perception of the warriors of the Wild West. Even in the warmest dwelling and on the best fur bedding, you can freeze if you do not know how to properly use the heat generated by your own body. The Indians understood perfectly well that internal heat is the main source of survival on a cold night. They knew that improper behavior before bedtime could negate any fire or shelter. Therefore, they honed their habits from generation to generation, passing them on as an important part of their culture. These methods were based on the principles of physiology and thermoregulation, although the Native Americans themselves explained them through practice and observation rather than scientific terms. The most important thing was the proper use of clothing. Contrary to our modern habits, a person should not sleep completely naked or in overly loose clothing because it lost its ability to retain warm air. The Indians knew that moisture was the main enemy of warmth, and therefore paid special attention to ensuring that their clothes were completely dry before going to bed. Often, people prepared a special set of clothes in advance, which they put on just before going to bed. This approach allowed the body to warm up faster and stay comfortable longer. During sleep, a person could take off their outer clothing, damp from daytime sweat, and put on dry clothing intended for rest. A multi-layered system was used for sleeping, similar to that used during the day, but optimized for immobility. The bottom layer, adjacent to the body, was made of soft leather or thin fabric that did not irritate the skin and absorb moisture better than coarse materials. The upper layers created air pockets that trapped warm air and acted as natural insulation. The more pockets there were, the more evenly the heat was retained throughout the body. It is believed that this system prevented sudden temperature changes during sleep. The space between the layers trapped air, which, when heated, provided additional insulation. It was extremely important to protect the limbs. The feet and hands lose heat the fastest, and the Indians noticed early on that a person with frozen feet cannot warm up properly. Therefore, special fur or thick leather moccasins and mittens were used for sleeping, which were worn even in relatively mild weather. These items worked as individual heat capsules, preventing the body from wasting energy on uselessly warming exposed areas. Sometimes dry grass or soft moss was placed inside for better insulation. These items could be even more important than the main blanket, as they prevented heat loss in the most vulnerable areas. Another technique was to use the warmth of another person. In traditional dwellings, people often slept huddled close together, especially during long periods of cold weather. The warm body of a neighbor was the most effective and accessible source of heat, requiring no effort or fuel. Sometimes mothers would place their children between adults so that they would receive warmth from both sides. This sleeping arrangement made the overall temperature in the room significantly higher. A group of sleeping people lying close together formed a collective heater that significantly increased the temperature in the sleeping area. Hot stones were sometimes used for additional heating. The stones were heated in a small hearth and then wrapped in thick cloth or skin so as not to burn the skin. Such a stone slowly gave off heat and created a stable source of gentle heating that lasted for many hours. Sometimes they were placed in several places so that the heat was distributed more evenly. Mothers could put them under their children's sides to ensure a peaceful sleep without waking up. Such a natural heating pad was placed under the feet or under the side. Before going to bed, a person could drink a hot herbal decoction or eat a small amount of high-calorie food, such as pemmican. This not only provided energy, but also accelerated the metabolism, causing the body to produce internal heat more actively. This was especially important during the coldest months when the body lost strength faster than usual. Some tribes used special warming mixtures based on meat, fat, and berries. All this allowed them to fall asleep faster and maintain a stable temperature for several hours. This stimulated the metabolism, causing the body to produce internal heat more actively, which was then retained in multi-layered clothing and skins. Thus, the art of sleeping warm without a fire was a whole science based on the synergy of several factors: insulation from below, multiple layers on top, protection of the limbs, and the use of collective heat. Each of these elements was important in itself, but only together did they provide the maximum effect and allow people to survive even the harshest nights. Native Americans did not perceive warmth as a luxury. For them, it was a condition for survival and part of their daily discipline. Their experience shows how important it is to understand the needs of your own body. It was not just survival, but the art of effective body temperature management. What basic things related to warmth do you think we overlook? The clothing of indigenous peoples was not just decoration. It was a dynamic thermoregulation system that worked in all conditions. It was shaped by centuries of observing nature and their own bodies, so every detail had a practical purpose. This approach allowed people to survive in regions where temperatures could vary by tens of degrees in a single day. As a result, clothing became not just protection, but an extension of the human body. It worked as a natural mechanism for conserving heat and maintaining normal body temperature. The basis was always the first inner layer, made of soft, well-processed leather or thin fabric. It fit snugly to the body and served as a second skin, allowing free movement and maintaining comfort. Its main task was to absorb moisture while remaining as dry as possible so that the person would not get cold in the slightest breeze. This layer was made of materials that were carefully crafted so as not to rub the skin or restrict movement. It was the right inner layer that determined how effectively the entire clothing system worked. The next step was the ability of this layer to retain heat even during active work. Indigenous peoples knew that wet clothing quickly cooled the body, so they paid special attention to the proper treatment of leather. Thanks to this, the inner clothing could remain dry even after long journeys. It helped the body maintain a stable temperature and not get cold during short rest stops. People understood that it was this layer that determined comfort and health during the cold season. Intermediate layers, or a kind of sweater, created air pockets that retained heat perfectly. These layers were made so that there were small spaces between them where heated air was trapped. The air became a natural insulator, equal in effectiveness to modern synthetic materials. Such shirts and jackets were loose enough not to interfere with movement during hunting or work. They also allowed the body to gradually release excess heat without causing excessive sweating. Another advantage of intermediate layers was their versatility. They could be easily replaced, dried by the fire, or supplemented with a new layer in case of a sudden cold snap. People often use several thin skins instead of one thick one to flexibly control heat regulation. Such clothing was ideal for life in the steppes, forests, or mountains, where it was necessary to quickly adapt to changing weather conditions. It made travel and long journeys much safer. The outer or protective layer was the most durable and was designed to protect against wind, rain, and snow. It was made from thick bison or deer skin, which had natural water-repellent properties. Sometimes it was coated with special fats or resins to make it completely impervious to moisture. This layer acted as natural armor, protecting the body from sudden gusts of wind and cold air. It retained heat inside the clothing and prevented the weather from affecting the person's internal climate. This dense layer was necessary not only in winter. Even in summer in some regions, strong winds could cool the body sharply, especially in the evening hours. Therefore, protective clothing was an important part of everyday wardrobe. It could serve as a shelter, a seat, and even a temporary canopy during rain. Its versatility made it indispensable in everyday life and travel, and its durability allowed one set to be worn for many years. Particular attention was paid to sealing vulnerable areas, such as the neck, wrists, and ankles. These areas allow cold air to penetrate clothing faster than others and are the main cause of general hypothermia. Leg warmers, thick cuffs, scarves, and fur inserts were used to protect them. They retained heat in the area of large arteries, helping the body warm up faster and retain heat longer. This approach made it easy to control heat loss even in the harshest frosts. The importance of protecting the head and neck was particularly well understood. People knew that a significant amount of heat could escape through exposed areas, so they wore fur hats, hoods, or light capes that covered their shoulders. These items of clothing not only kept them warm, but also protected them from wind and snow. They could be quickly put on and taken off as needed, helping to control body temperature during activity. Moccasins, the footwear of indigenous peoples, were a well-thought-out part of the overall heat protection system. They were made of soft leather that molded to the shape of the foot and allowed for comfortable movement. The moccasins were stuffed with dry fur or grass, creating a natural lining that insulated the feet from the cold ground. Such footwear was surprisingly warm, light, and practical, suitable for long journeys in the cold. It kept the feet comfortable even in harsh weather. The stuffing of the moccasins could be changed several times a day if it got wet or compacted from long walks. Dry materials allowed the feet to stay warm and not freeze even during prolonged contact with snow. Some peoples used special herbs that retained heat and had antiseptic properties. This helped protect the feet from frostbite and diseases associated with cold and dampness. The entire clothing system was flexible and adaptable to any weather or activity. During intense work, a person would remove 1 or 2 layers to avoid overheating and excessive sweating. When a cold wind started or night fell, they added layers again to restore heat protection. This approach helped maintain an optimal temperature balance throughout the day. It prevented dangerous hypothermia, which most often occurs after overheating. The ability to quickly change the thickness of clothing was an important element of survival. People could easily assemble or disassemble a set of clothes by distributing the layers in a bag or on a belt. This made them independent of weather conditions and allowed them to feel confident even in unpredictable climates. The multi-layer system not only protected against the cold, it allowed people to fully control their own body heat. This well-designed clothing was the result of a deep understanding of the environment and their own physiological needs. It showed how carefully indigenous peoples studied nature and how skillfully they used its possibilities. Their thermoregulation system was in many ways superior to many modern solutions, retaining heat in a natural and safe way. It became an example of how people can live in harmony with the climate without creating unnecessary complications. This approach to clothing allowed people to survive not just in the cold, but in conditions where the weather could be harsh and unpredictable. It reflected the wisdom accumulated over generations and showed that comfort depends not only on materials, but also on understanding how to use them correctly. This layering system became a real mainstay for life in nature and proved its effectiveness over the centuries. Ready to learn a secret that will change your life? The lives of nomadic peoples, such as the Plains tribes, were inextricably linked to movement, and sometimes they were caught in sudden and violent blizzards. In such conditions, it was impossible to build a fire or set up a tipi. Survival depended on quick reactions and knowledge of insulation principles used by subarctic peoples, such as the Cree and Athabascan. The most important thing was to find or create a shelter that would use the main insulator of winter: snow. Snow, especially loose snow, is filled with millions of air bubbles, making it an excellent heat insulator. A properly constructed snow shelter could raise the internal temperature to tens of degrees above the outside temperature. The simplest form of shelter was a snow trench, or buried burrow. Using snowshoes or a shovel made of wood or bone, a person would dig a small cave in a snowdrift large enough to lie down in. The snow above served as a roof, and the entrance was plugged with a piece of snow block or branches. More complex but incredibly effective was a quinzhee or igloo-type shelter. An igloo, the classic dome-shaped house of the Inuit, required special knowledge of snow and masonry techniques, but provided the most reliable protection. The quinzhee, which could also be built by the Indians of the interior regions, was simpler. A snowdrift was first compacted, and then an inner cavity was hollowed out of it. The secret of these shelters was in the thickness of the snow walls, which had to be at least a foot thick. This thickness ensured that the temperature inside would not drop below zero, even if it was very cold outside. The heat generated by a single human body was enough to maintain this temperature. Inside the snow shelter, a raised platform was always made for sleeping. The platform was made of branches or dry grass to prevent the body from coming into contact with cold snow and meltwater. Insulation from below, as in a tipi, was a key factor. Human breath in such a shelter quickly raised the humidity. To prevent ice formation and suffocation, a small ventilation hole was always made in the roof or wall. This provided minimal but constant air circulation without letting heat escape. Staying in a snow shelter during a blizzard was a matter of patience and endurance. A person had to remain relatively still to minimize perspiration and conserve heat. It was a perfect example of how humans use the elements for their own protection. How do you think they coped with this terrible weather? The principle of small space was key to effective heat conservation in all conditions. People understood that by reducing the volume around them, the body could heat the air faster and retain that heat longer. The smaller the space, the less energy is expended, and the easier it is to create a stable, comfortable temperature, especially in severe cold. This was vital during winter migrations, when every calorie lost could cost strength or even life. This approach was used both when spending the night in open areas and when planning permanent dwellings. For indigenous peoples, heat conservation was not a luxury, but the basis of daily survival. In a tipi, despite its impressive size, the living space for sleeping was actually limited to a small area around the hearth and under the canopy. People deliberately created a low space where heat could collect and be retained in a dense layer. They did not try to heat the entire tall cone to the very top, because they understood that hot air inevitably rises and cools quickly. Instead, they built small partitions out of skins, which reduced the volume and helped to retain heat in the lower part of the teepee. Inside such a confined space, it was significantly warmer than outside, even in strong winds and snowfall. This method allowed them to maintain an acceptable temperature without consuming a lot of fuel. During long winter trips, or when there was no large shelter available, people could build temporary shelters based on minimalism. Such shelters were made from the most accessible materials that could be found nearby. These could be small huts, frames made of bent branches, or light wigwams covered with bark, snow, or skins. The area of such a shelter barely exceeded the size of a sleeping place, but this is what made it incredibly effective. Heat from breathing and the body quickly accumulated inside, and a thick layer of outer covering protected from the wind. Even in the harshest weather, such miniature shelters allowed people to wait out the night with minimal heat loss. As already mentioned, cocoon-like bags made of skins were used for individual sleep. Each bag was designed so that a person could fit completely inside, leaving only a small opening for breathing. When a person climbed inside, they instantly reduced the heated space to the size of their body, which significantly accelerated the warming process. The heat radiated by the body was reflected from the inner walls and retained inside, creating a stable layer of warm air. These cocoons were made from animal fur, which retained heat well and remained effective even in high humidity. Thanks to this, a person could warm up even when snow or frost made the surrounding space almost unsuitable for sleep. Compressing space was also a psychological technique. In a cramped, isolated place, people felt more protected and calm because the walls of the bag or shelter created a feeling of complete safety. This allowed them to relax, fall asleep faster, and not waste extra energy fighting the cold and anxiety. In a small space, sounds were muffled, and the wind was almost inaudible, which added to the feeling of peace. Such sleep was deeper, which meant it contributed to the full recovery of the body after a hard day. For people who lived in constant motion and were often threatened by the elements, such conditions were invaluable. This principle contrasts with the modern concept of comfort, where large spaces are often associated with prosperity. Today, many people strive to have spacious rooms and high ceilings without considering how difficult it is to maintain warmth in such spaces without powerful heating. For indigenous peoples, however, the efficiency and functionality of a small, easily heated space was a top priority. They intuitively understood that heat should always be conserved, not wasted. Their approach was simple, logical, and based on constant interaction with nature. That is why these principles have worked for centuries and continue to inspire modern survival methods. Metabolism, or the process of generating heat within the body, was the last and most reliable line of defense against the cold. The Indians understood well that even the warmest dwelling would not save them if the body itself was unable to maintain a stable internal heat. They knew that the body constantly produces energy and that this process can be enhanced or weakened depending on what a person eats and how they behave. This understanding allowed them to survive in places where temperatures could drop to very low levels and remain there for weeks. It was the realization that the body is its own hearth that made Native Americans pay so much attention to what they ate. They knew that if they warmed their bodies properly from the inside, they could withstand even severe frost without resorting to a large fire. This approach was especially important during long journeys or sudden cold fronts, when fuel for fires was limited. Therefore, controlling metabolism became an integral part of their survival culture. The main source of metabolic heat was fatty, high-calorie food. The most famous product of this type was pemmican, a mixture of dried meat, berries, and animal fat. It was incredibly nutritious and could be stored for years, making it the perfect winter food. The fat in pemmican burns slowly, providing the body with a long-lasting supply of energy and helping to retain heat even in extreme cold. That is why pemmican was considered real fuel for the body. But the Indians did not only use pemmican. In winter, they could eat bison fat, bear fat, or dishes made from fatty bone broths. All this allowed the body to function like an internal furnace, maintaining a constant temperature. People knew from experience that a lack of fat in the diet weakened the body and caused people to become hypothermic more quickly, even in relatively mild weather. Therefore, fatty foods were not a luxury, but the basis of winter survival. Before bedtime or during particularly cold periods, people could eat a small portion of fatty food to activate internal heating. It was a familiar and time-tested practice that helped prepare the body for the night cold. The energy from such food was released gradually, providing stable heat that was retained under furs or layers of clothing. Thus, even without fire, a person could sleep in relatively comfortable conditions, relying entirely on their own body. In addition to fatty foods, Native Americans also consumed foods containing proteins and carbohydrates. They knew that meat provided energy more quickly, and dried berries helped restore strength during journeys. However, it was fats that were considered the main source of heat in winter, as they not only kept people warm, but also preserved energy for a long period. This diet was balanced by the experience of generations who had observed what best helped people stay warm. During forced inactivity, for example, in a blizzard, a person had to avoid excessive activity. Any unnecessary movements burned calories that were difficult to replenish in winter conditions. If a person wasted energy, it could lead to rapid cooling of the body because after a brief increase in heat, the body remained exhausted. Therefore, in severe cold, it was recommended not to walk unnecessarily, but to conserve as much internal heat as possible. At such times, people preferred to sit or lie down, wrapped in thick skins to minimize heat loss. This allowed the body to expend energy only on maintaining internal temperature, rather than on movement. This method was especially important in sudden blizzards when it was dangerous to go anywhere. At rest, a person could retain heat much longer than during active movements. Stimulating blood circulation was also an important element of metabolism control. Sometimes, before going to bed, people would rub their bodies or do a few simple movements to get their blood flowing. This allowed the limbs, which cool down the fastest, to receive additional warmth. Good blood circulation ensured that the hands and feet remained warm at night and did not become numb from the cold. These methods did not require much effort, but they had a noticeable effect. Even a short warm-up could help a person get through a long night in cold weather more easily. People observed their body's reactions and knew that a slight warm-up before bed made rest much more comfortable. This was another part of a system in which each element worked to preserve internal heat. The principles of nutrition and activity management were part of an overall survival strategy. They allowed people to be independent of external sources of heat and feel confident even when the fuel for the fire was running out. For Native Americans, the ability to warm themselves on their own was not just a useful skill, but a real art that was passed down from generation to generation. This art helped them to survive in harsh climatic conditions. Thus, metabolism became a reliable ally of humans when external conditions became extreme. Native Americans understood that nature had given humans a powerful internal mechanism that could protect the body from the cold if used correctly. With proper nutrition and sensible distribution of energy, the body could maintain warmth even on the coldest nights, saving many lives. The key element in protection from the cold was, of course, clothing and flooring made from animal skins. However, the skin was only useful if it was properly tanned. The secrets of tanning were passed down from generation to generation and were a true art that made the skin soft, durable, and most importantly, waterproof or at least water repellent. The traditional tanning process was long and laborious. It involved cleaning the skin of meat and fat residues, removing the hair, if it was leather for clothing, and finally treating it with special compounds that prevented rotting and made the skin soft. Often, the animal's own brains were used as a tanning agent. Brains contain natural fats and enzymes that, when rubbed into the skin, made it soft and elastic. Such leather could be crumpled and smoothed out again without losing its properties. To ensure water-repellent properties, the leather was treated with fat, especially on the outside. Animal fat rubbed into the surface created a thin, invisible layer that caused water to roll off. This was especially important for moccasins and the outer layer of winter clothing. The fur used for flooring also required special treatment to prevent it from sticking together and to preserve its airy structure. Preserving the looseness of the fur was critical, as it was the air layer that provided the main insulation. Properly tanned bison or moose hides could last for decades if cared for properly. They were a valuable resource that provided warmth and protection for the entire family. It was not just a craft, but a key survival skill. The last and one of the most effective techniques for conserving heat was the collective use of heat. In traditional dwellings, whether tipis, dugouts, or longhouses, people did not sleep alone. Sleeping in a close group was not just a cultural habit, but a conscious survival strategy. The heat emitted by a single human body is sufficient to sustain life, but it may not be enough for comfortable sleep in severe cold. The heat emitted by several people sleeping close together adds up, and they create a collective heat zone. When two or more people huddle together while sleeping, the surface area through which heat is lost is significantly reduced. The heat that one person radiates toward their neighbor is not lost to the surrounding space, but is used to warm both of them. This effect was especially noticeable in small spaces, such as winter lodges or igloos. The collective heat of several families or a group of warriors quickly heated the enclosed space. This reduced or even eliminated the need for a hearth. Sleeping in a group was also psychologically reassuring. In the wild and cold, the sense of community and security that sleeping next to others provided was no less important than physical warmth. Thus, the sleeping partner was not just a roommate. He was part of the thermoregulation system, a living and most reliable source of heat. This proves that in harsh natural conditions, social ties became a factor in physical survival. We saw that the heat conservation methods used by the indigenous peoples of North America were examples of engineering based on a deep understanding of nature. They did not simply survive, they thrived in harsh conditions, turning cold, snow, and earth into their allies. Insulation from below with fur flooring, insulation from above with layers of clothing, retaining heat in dwellings with double walls or earthen walls, and using body heat and collective sleeping were all part of a unified, holistic system. It was not simply a lack of fire and blankets, but a skill based on thousands of years of experience. Their knowledge is still relevant today, proving that the simplest, most natural solutions are often the most reliable and effective. This legacy is not just a page in history, but a lesson in how humans can live in harmony with nature, rather than against it. Which of the heat conservation strategies discussed seems most ingenious to you? Creating a mobile thermos or using an earth blanket? Suggest topics for future videos you would like to see on our channel in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss out on new research.